Uh,
So that I hit record on my end, but if you hit it, it'll record on your end as well.
that's fine. If you record it, that's fine as long as you post it.
Okay. All right. So let's just take a break and then I'll lead us in.
Okay.
All right. Hello and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale the Real Seeker. And today we're back with a familiar face, somebody who's been on the show before, Al Ruhl. Hey, Al, how are you?
I'm well over here in Western Canada.
Yeah, Weston can okay, of course. I'm
So how are things out east?
pretty good. It's been very rainy the last few days for some reason.
Really?
Yeah.
Because we've been pretty dry. We need rain.
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully, I don't know. I'll blow on it and hopefully it'll go out west or but yeah, we're basically just for the audience. So Al was on my show, I think just maybe 3 weeks ago or something like that. Very short time ago. And he was brought on due to a request from a fan, Harry Stark, to address Jewish myths about Christianity and about Jesus. And he did a great job sort of specializing in some of, at least a couple of objections, a historical objection and one of the theological objections, if I'm remembering properly. And we got some responses to that from certain Jewish people that weren't necessarily happy with some of what he said on the historical end, and they raised some challenges. And Al saw that, and so he wants to kind of give a response, responding to some of those specific historical based objections. So, but that's what we're here to do today. And with that said, Al has sort of a presentation going over those objections. So I'll turn it straight over to you to go ahead and give your case.
Okay. Okay, so our friend there's this one guy who did about 80% of the comments. His name is Yisrael High. Um and he did most of the comments. So we're going to be responding to his stuff mainly. Now, again, I'm not denying this stuff, but usually there's a context to all this stuff. Um, we'll do this in order. We're going to be addressing his Persian objection too, but we're going to do that in order, um, because otherwise it won't uh, make sense. Okay, so his first one was the Council of Elvira in 305 and the Council of Claremont in 535 banned Jews from public office. Okay, that's not my time of history in church history. I don't know if that's true or not. It could be true. I think that would be a bit odd in 305. The Christians had no power then. They were being persecuted. There's no authority until later on in the fourth century, but at 305, they're under heavy persecution. Uh, Council 535. I probably should have checked my history of the Franks, but I can't check it now because you probably read the history of Franks by Gregory of Tours, right?
I haven't read it fully, but I've referenced it and stuff. Yeah.
I probably should have checked this because it's Clermont, France. So, oh well, that's my fault, I guess. Okay, King Sizzabut. He says he forced Jews into baptism. Now this is true, but keep in mind. Now this is something that I'm going to say. Just because a Christian does something doesn't mean it's in accordance with Christianity. For example, if you were to ask a Jew, and I'm not even talking about the secular or the liberal Jews, just Jews who are practicing Jews, if they've ate pork in their life, if they've ate pork or some non-kosher food, and I'm not talking accidentally either. I'm talking knowingly. Oh, okay, I'm not supposed to be eating that, but who cares, right? Um, Most of them, I think, have. Um, I think in Israel and certainly in America and Canada. Again, I'm talking practicing, not all practicing Jews, like the ones in the black coats and stuff probably haven't. But no, but most Jews have had that stuff. I've talked to Jews who are practicing, and they're like, "Yeah, I've had it before." They admit to it. Again, I'm not talking about the ones who are non-practicing. I'm talking about practicing Jews. Now, if a Jew eats pork, is it the fault of the Torah, the rabbi, or the Talmud, or whatever? Is it the fault of the rabbi? No, because the rabbi is saying don't eat that. The Torah is saying don't eat that. The Jewish commentaries and texts and all that stuff are saying don't eat the pork, don't eat the non-kosher, right? But it happens anyway. So what happens now is Christian kings are the same way. They can do stuff against, and I'm not saying from like a 21st century postmodern post Vatican II perspective. No, no, no. Kings who did unethical things were condemned by the church in their day, including against Jews, and we're going to get to some of that. Now, the first piece of evidence he came to is King Sisabat. Now, I got a question for you, Dale. In 7th century Spain, who was the top theologian?
Well, putting me to the test. In seventh century Spain, um, I'm not sure just off the top of my head.
It's a fellow named Saint Isidore of Seville.
Okay.
He's a doctor of the Catholic Church. I don't know how big he is in Protestant circles, but he is a top church authority in 7th century Spain. And King Sisbat did, um, he did engage in some forced conversion, but this is what the highest religious authority about it said. In the era, in the second year of the Emperor Heraclius, Sisebut was called to the royal dignity after Gundamar and ruled for 8 years and 6 months. At the beginning of his reign, he forced the Jews into the Christian faith, indeed acting with zeal, but not according to knowledge. For he compelled by force those who should have been called to faith through reason. But as it was written, whether okay, it stopped. So, like, okay, he's being condemned by the top religious authority at the time for doing something evil. It's always been the church has always been against forced conversion, but sometimes, like a king or something, will do something that's not the fault of the church. Church has never said to force convert anyone. Sometimes there's been some debates what to do with people who have been forced converted, but they've never said to force convert someone. Okay,
Do you mind if I jump in with a follow-up? Just
have at her.
because so while you were speaking, I kind of looked up the Council of Elvira and stuff to see what is it generally about. And from what I've seen in it, the canons, there is no persecution of Jews per se, but what there is persecution of Christians associating with Jews. So it's specifically saying you can't marry a Jew. You've got to be separate from the Jews and stuff like that. So that seems to be what the purpose of this council is with respect to Jews in Spain.
Oh, interesting. Because I mean, in terms of, and like that's pretty straightforward. Because I mean, if you're from a Christian family, your parents are going to tell you to marry another Christian. If you're from a Jewish family, your kids are going to tell you to, your parents are going to tell you to marry another Jew, right? That just goes without saying. And that's true in 2025. That's true back in the 300s, 400s, or whatever. Yeah. So,
Yeah, and he was. I think the our skeptical friend in the chat, his main thing was saying, well, they were persecuted because they couldn't hold public office or something. So that was the form the persecution takes that they were asking you about.
well, again, I don't think that was possible in 305 because the Christians had no political power in 305. They did after Constantine converted, but 305 Constantine was a pagan still. All right. Um okay, where are we here? By 694 take Jewish okay, took okay. I now a lot of this stuff is not translated. 694. I've tried my best to read in Latin. What I understand is now I'd like to see the source, but based on the stuff I've read, that is if a Jewish family converts to Christianity, um, and the parents go back to Judaism, they take the kids away to be raised as Christian. I don't think this applied to all Jews. Now, I know what you're saying. Well, what about that situation? Well, it's not great, but I mean, there's a context. Again, I would like to see the primary source on this because I've heard of this at all. I've looked it up, but I can't find the primary source. So it could be just a myth or something. But if our friend Ami Israel High can find the primary source, preferably in English, though I can take my chances with the Latin, we'll see.
And just while you're drink, just for context for the audience, so that this was one of the objections about the seventh century king Sisebud,
Yeah.
saying apparently he mandated baptism for Jews, and by 694, this skeptic is saying that they were enslaving Jews and taking Jewish children to be raised as Christians. So that's what you're responding to, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm responding to. He now I want to talk about the Persian thing because we're in the 600s. Okay. The 1614 murder of Byzantines in Jerusalem, which was committed by Persians with some Jewish allies, aside from exaggerating the contribution of Jews to make it sound like a Jewish persecution of Christians, you completely ignored that the Byzantines had expelled Jews from Jerusalem, which is why the Jews allied with the Persians. That's literally the exact opposite. They were expelled because they were allied with the Persians, not the other way around. But in terms of the Jews just being kind of like a cosmetic addition, and it was the Persian. This is the Chronicle of Theophanes, the Confessor. Talk about 614. In this year, the Persians took Jordan, Palestine, and its holy city in battle. At the hands of the Jews, they killed many people in it, as some say 90,000. So some put the number at 90,000. Again, who knows if that's correct? But it's a high number. The Jews, and way more than when the Christians took Jerusalem. If you read Ibn al-Kalanisi, who's an Islamic chronicler, he chronicles the taking of Jerusalem, but it says they put the Jews in one synagogue and burnt them down. So one synagogue full of Jews. The Jews obviously killed more in 614 than the Catholics did in 1099. Okay. The Jews, according to, okay, some say 90,000. The Jews, according to their means, bought the Christians and then killed them. The Persians captured and led off to Persia Zechariah, the patriarch of Jerusalem, the precious and life-giving wood, that's the cross, the cross of Christ that Helena of Constantinople had recovered, and many prisoners. So it seems like the Persians were just taking prisoners. The Jews were doing the killing. If according to Theophanes, the confessor, who's actually a saint in both the Catholic and Orthodox churches. Um, all right, so that's that.
Yeah, and that sounds like it's just a common feature of warfare. If you find out you've got a portion of your city or something who's aligned or likely to be aligned with the enemy and stuff like that, then you're going to take precautions, defensive precautionary measures and stuff, right? So
Okay.
like that doesn't seem like it's specifically some kind of Christian hatred towards Jews. It would just be towards anybody that would be likely to side with the enemy, any traitor, even if it's a Christian.
I'm trying to find the book. I don't have the book for my primary sources on the Crusades, but I've got Jewish chroniclers, a Jewish chronicler in Mainz. In here, let's see if I can find it on X. Um, basically, okay, so he talks about in the okay, so basically at the Council of Clermont in 1095, Pope Urban was and by the way, ironically, this was still uh, during the investiture controversy. Um, it's what happened was okay. I think I all right. I found the quote. Um, okay. So what happened basically in that council in 1095? The Pope tells the Christians to take up the cross and go to the Middle East to fight the Turk, to help the Byzantines, help the brothers in the East, and fight the Turk who had conquered that land and to reclaim the holy city. In none of the speeches, there are five speeches that exist. I've read all of them, and none of them say to attack Jews. None of them. Again, so if someone attacks Jews, they're going against papal orders. Now, if you there's a book that I have. It's called Prime. It's called. It's edited by Edward Peters. Actually, I found it.
Hmm.
I found
Awesome. Yeah,
it.
he's finding that. Obviously, the point is, look, that the reason the Roman Catholics or Latins did the Crusades was against Muslim aggression against Byzantines. So they wanted to protect their fellow Christian brothers in the Byzantine Empire. It had nothing to do with Jews or anything.
Yeah. So this is the book that our friend Israel High needs to pick up. It's got a ton of stuff for the First Crusade. It's got part of Fulcher of Chartres. It's got the five accounts of the speech that the Pope made, and it's got some Jewish accounts that describe because when the rogue crusaders, the guy named Amico, Count Amico of Leiningen, um, in complete defiance to what the Pope said, took troops into the Rhineland and attacked Jewish communities in the city of Worms, Speyer, Trier, and Mainz, and those areas. Again, against papal orders. And the bishops of those cities tried their best to save the Jewish populations. And it has the Jewish accounts in here. Let me show you what a Jewish chronicle from Mainz said. It's in the book, but I got it on a document on my computer. When Bishop John heard, he came with a large force and helped the Jewish community wholeheartedly and brought them indoors and saved them from there, referring to the Crusaders and burghers' hands. He seized some of the burghers and cut off their hands. He was a pious one among the nations. Indeed, God brought about well-being and salvation through him. Now, pious among the nations is a term that the Jews use for righteous Gentiles. Like if a Gentile, uh, like a Gentile, say in Poland or Ukraine or Hungary or something, saved Jews during the Holocaust, they'll like and put his own life at risk. They'll call him pious among the nations. If you go to Yad Vashem in Israel, I've never been to Israel. Um, it's to my understanding, if you go there, they talk about the pious among the nations. It's like their Holocaust museum, but they talk about the righteous Gentiles who tried their best to save Jewish lives. Some were successful. Some like Oscar Schindler, for example. He's a famous example. Everyone's heard of him because of Schindler's List and all that stuff. But there are other ones as well. And that term is a long-term term. And they were used Bishop John of Speyer. And a lot of other bishops tried to do the same thing in those Rhineland cities. So, I mean, the church was siding with the Jews there. You just have a rogue crusader disobeying the Pope, and the church opposed them. So you can't blame the church. You can blame Count Amico and his band of vigilantes. But I mean, that's like Count Amico was like Baruch Goldstein. Does Baruch Goldstein represent all Jews? No, he represents a radical faction who most rabbis have condemned. They've condemned Goldstein and his teacher, Meir Kahana.
Can
Okay,
okay, so let me ask maybe some pushback that
sure.
what's his name, Amy might raise, right? And say,
Sure.
okay, look, well, I get what you're saying in terms of officially and legally, the authorities were putting on a bit of a front. They knew they needed Jews for business purposes, economic purposes, or whatever. So of course, they didn't come out and say to attack the Jews. But the fact that these renegades went and did that reflects the underlying overall culture of this hatred for Jews among Roman Catholics or Christians and stuff. So they were representing the actual majority of the people. What if somebody said that from a culture standpoint?
Well, I'd say they'd have to prove that. I'd say they'd have to prove that. I mean, you can say anything you want, but if you can't back it up with primary sources, or at least credible sources, that's like it's worthless. Like if I said Baruch Goldstein, you know who that is, right? Baruch Goldstein.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure our friend does too. If I said Baruch Goldstein represented all the Jews in the Knesset, um, they'd be like, "You better back that up, okay?" You know. And yeah, he's a whack job. He might represent like one person or something, but like the the like if I'm gonna say that he represents all the Jews in the Knesset, I need to back that up. Just like you'd have to say Amico of Leiningen, in defiance of the Pope, in defiance of the local bishops. That's the two big authorities, the Pope and the bishops. None of them said to do that, and they tried to stop what he was doing. So if you're gonna say it was not out of altruism, but out of some, they tried to save the bankers that were the source of their income or something like that. I'd like to see some evidence. You'd have to provide me evidence from that period. Okay, and
Right.
that's the same thing I'd ask about everything.
Okay. And just one last quick follow-up. What
Sure.
for these people specifically, do we know what was their motivation to go into these places and attack the Jews?
Um,
Why did
well,
that
there's
happen?
this famous quote that gets thrown around in the medieval sources, like it's like, wow, we're gonna go kill infidels. Why go all the way to the Holy Land when you can kill infidels here? In other words, the Jews. There were no, at the time, there was no Muslims in Europe, or in that part of Europe anyway. So no Turks in Europe, and so some people just use that opportunity. And if you read the Crusade chroniclers, they talk about this episode with scorn. It's a black eye on the Crusades. It's not a good thing that this happened.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll let you continue. I just wanted to ask those couple questions.
Sure, sure. All right, let's get the next one. Okay. In Norwich, England, the Jews were accused of murdering Christian children for ritual use of blood. Again, um, this is known as the blood libel, that they would kidnap, the Jews would kidnap Christian children and use them to prepare ritual, the matzah and other food that they use. Um, Again, now this did happen, and it did start in England around that time. But what no one ever points out is that popes always condemned the blood libel. Pope Gregory the Ninth condemned it. Pope Innocent the Fourth. This is 13th century, so it's first brought up in England in the 12th, but it starts to gain traction elsewhere. Um, uh, and basically, what happened? The popes at that time, Pope Gregory the Tenth, he knew some Jews. I'm getting a phone call here. He knew some Jews that had converted to Catholicism, and he goes, "Hey guys, is this true?" And they're like, "No, the Jews don't do that at all." In fact, now let me read you what Pope Gregory the Tenth. There's a ton of things a ton of popes. I could use Pope Gregory the Ninth. I could use Pope Innocent the Fourth, all 13th century popes. All right, and this is his encyclical. Um, it's called Papal Protection of the Jews, and if you go to papalencyclicals.net, you can check this area, check this document. And I'm going to read two paragraphs that are relevant to the blood libel. Since it happens occasionally that some Christians lose their children, the Jews are accused by their enemies of secretly carrying off and killing these same Christian children, and of making sacrifices of the heart and blood of these very children. It happens too that the parents of these very children, or some other enemies of these Jews, secretly hide these very children in order that they may be able to injure these Jews, and in order that they may be able to extort from them a certain amount of money of redeeming them from their straits. The next paragraph. And most falsely do these Christians claim that Jews have secretly and furtively carried away these children and killed them, and that the Jews offer sacrifices from the heart and the blood of these children, since their law in this matter precisely and expressly forbids Jews to sacrifice, eat, or drink the blood, or to eat the flesh of animals having claws. This has been demonstrated many times at our court by Jews converted to the Christian faith. Nevertheless, very many Jews are often seized and detained unjustly because of this. We decree, remember, this is the Pope, highest authority in Christendom. We decree, therefore, that Christians need not be obeyed against Jews in the case of situation of this type, and we order that Jews seized under such a silly pretext be freed from imprisonment, and that they shall not be arrested henceforth on such a miserable pretext, unless, which we do not believe, they be caught in the commission of the crime. We decree that no Christian shall stir up anything new against them. This is the Pope talking, but that they should be maintained in the status and position in which they were in the time of our predecessors from antiquity till now. And then it continues. There's one more paragraph. Um, that it's to stop destroying Jewish cemeteries and all this stuff. I could read it, but you get the idea. The Pope is sticking up for, yes, some evil Christians, and no one's going to deny that evil Christians exist. I don't deny it. I'm sure you don't deny it. But yes, they did some evil things. But when they did things unjustly, the popes came to their defense. In fact, around this time, we're talking the 12 and 1300s. Um, okay, in 1346, okay, they talked about Britain expelling all the Jews in 1290. I'll get to that in a second. Um, in 1346, you got the Black Plague, and at this time, I'm sure you've heard of the Avignon Papacy. The Pope is in France at this time, in Avignon, France.
Yeah.
And Pope Clement the Sixth is the Pope, and the Black Plague happens, and a lot of people are dying. Kills off like a quarter of Europe's population, and a lot of people are blaming the Jews and persecuting Jews because of this. And he writes a papal bull, and he said, now the papal bull's in Latin. You can use Google Translate if you want, but he says in the papal bull that to stop to do this against Jews, because it's obvious it's not them, because Jews are in communities. Back then Jews lived in, and to a large extent today, Jews tend to live in their own communities, both in Israel and
They still exist in some places. Like
yeah, like in Calgary, in my city, there's an area where a lot of Jews live. Not every Jew lives there, but there's a big cluster of Jews. You've got some schools there. There's the Akiva Academy. You got the synagogues there. I know in your city there's a bunch of Jewish communities, right? They tend to live together. Not all of them, but they tend to live in clusters, right?
Mhm.
And if you go to Israel, it's the same way. You have the hardcore Jews, the ones in the like the black coats and the black hats, like they're in their own communities, where the Jews in like T Tel Aviv, who are like more modern cosmopolitan Jews, are
yeah, yeah,
just like that. But the point is, Jews live in communities normally, and the Pope pointed out that the plague was killing people far away from Jewish communities. So you can't blame the Jews for what is going on, because if Jews were up to it, it would only be the people close to the Jewish community. Instead, it's all over Europe. It's in Scandinavia, where I don't think any Jews at the time lived. Uh,
okay. So just I did have a couple quick questions about the last thing on the blood libel kind of
oh
thing.
yeah, sure, yeah, yeah.
So okay, so I know so you gave the quotes to the popes, and you said the you have several quotes from popes condemning this and stuff. just to clarify, there are no popes that's ever supported it, right? So all the popes that spoke on it condemned it, or were there some popes supporting it?
I am not aware of some supporting it. And keep in mind, like I'm Catholic and I study the medieval church. This is all I do. In fact, I challenge anyone to find me a pope. The only time I can find a pope saying to do something to treat the Jews bad is Pope, I believe it's Paul the Fourth or the Fifth, Fourth, where he puts the Jews in the ghetto in Rome. That's the only time I can. And again, that's not killing them. That's not. He gives them a while to sell their assets. And this is 1550 something. I can't remember the
Much,
exact year.
much later. And I just did a Google search. Again, take it for what it's worth, but AI on the Google search is saying no, there are no examples of texts where popes are actively supporting the blood libel thing. So,
Or,
okay,
or, or blaming the Jews for the Black Plague, for that matter.
yep,
Again, some individual Christians do it, but when you're condemned by the Pope, which is the highest Christian authority at that time, I would still argue today, but certainly at that time, um, there were yeah, there like the popes condemned that. Like again, there are Jews who eat pork. The rabbis say don't eat pork, but if a Jew eats pork, it's not the fault of the rabbi. It's not the fault of the Torah, because the rabbi and the Torah say don't eat the pork. Leviticus 11 is clear. But some Jews think they know better. You know what? You know what? Rabbi says that, but I'm gonna go and have some bacon or camels or some other non-kosher
there's a
food.
reason for the saying, right? Ten rabbis in the room, you'll have 11 opinions or something like that, right? It's a common.
Well, I think on eating pork, there's one opinion, and that's don't do it. That's pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like on things about like like on esoteric opinions about Kabbalah and stuff. Yeah, there's going to be 10 opinions, but um on eating pork, there's only one opinion. The rabbi's going to say don't do that, right?
Yeah.
And and therefore, if a Jew does do that, which Jews do, they're going against what the rabbi says. Again, intentional. I'm not talking accidentally. I accidentally ate a sandwich, didn't know it had ham in it. No, there are Jews who intentionally eat that stuff. I've seen it. There's this one time my dad and I were um, in his business. We had a Jew helping us out. Um, and then my dad's like, he's taking the whole office for Chinese food, and that's only four of us, and my dad turns to him and like how a Chinese restaurant is. You don't order an entree, you order a bunch of stuff and you take from here and here, right? Um, there and my dad turns to him. He's like, "So, is there anything we shouldn't order?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm not kosher. Feel free to order whatever." Right? Um. So. Yeah. So not everyone does that, but I guarantee you, his rabbi wouldn't have approved of that. I don't know how often this guy went to synagogue. He certainly went for the holidays and stuff, um, um, but I think his dad goes on a regular basis. I don't think the mom goes to synagogue. I mean, she's a Jew, but I don't think. Again, I don't know. But the point is, he said, "Feel free to order what you want." So we got a bunch of pork stuff, a bunch of shrimp, stuff that he can't eat according to the Torah, and we ate it. So he knowingly broke the Torah. Again, the rabbi said no. He said yes. That happened with Christians too, with the blood libel. The Pope
Yeah.
said no, but the Christians thought they knew better for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea of disobeying authority is not a modern thing. It's not a post-Enlightenment thing. It goes back all the way. So,
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Well, the other thing, so I wish I was able to say this earlier because once you started the blood libel stuff, and now we're moving beyond that into the Black Death stuff. remember your historical thesis, which this person was responding to, was that for the first 1,000 years, there's that, I think, shockingly, you were saying there is more instances of Jewish on Christian persecution than Christian on Jewish persecution, despite, some sparing or rare occasions where it happened. For the first 1,000 years, that seemed to be the case. So all of these examples now, that this is after the first 1,000 years where you
Yeah,
are
well,
committed.
there was a thing with King Sisebut and things like that, but apart from that, like what happened in with the Persians and the Byzantines and the Jews was far worse than that. At least I think so. Seems like the numbers are higher, and plus you have the Jews siding with Julian the Apostate against the Christians. You have Simon Bar Kokhba, um, who is this messianic figure who persecuting the Jewish Christians in the Holy Land. Um, yeah, that you can read that in the writings of Saint Justin Martyr. Um, yeah, that guy was a crazy guy, Bar Kokhba, if you've ever studied his life, but he persecuted the Jewish Christians. And yeah, so now we're on to the second millennium. The second millennium is there's more Christian persecution of Jews. I mean, if you want to get into like the communists of the 20th century, that's something else. But and I'm sure we'll get there eventually. But at least until 1900, um, it's like a one-way thing. Um, from 1,000 to 1900, the Christians are persecuting Jews. What I'm trying to say is this was often done against church teaching, as I've quoted the popes, and it was condemned by the church when it happened. Or there's a very specific context to it. We're going to get to the kings of France. Uh, I think I think we need to talk about the expulsion from England. He wants to talk about that. Um, Again, that's again not a pretty episode, but I could go into that. Okay, so the Jews in England, how did they get there? They came over with William the Conqueror. In Anglo-Saxon England, pre-1066, October 14th, we're coming up on the anniversary of the Battle of Hastings. Um, that was October 14th, 1066. There were no Jews in England. They come over with William the Conqueror in France. And so uh, they come over with William, and they financed his invasion, right? So they're a banking class. And so what happens when they get to England? They do a lot of banking. They're Jews heavy into banking, and some Jews unfortunately start exploiting people. I think in 1278, a bunch of Jews were caught making counterfeit currency. Um, and in 1274, at the Council of Lyon in France, the Pope tells the kings, because the Pope could tell kings at this point, he couldn't do this, in 1400, 1500, but he could do this in 1274. He says to ban usury in your kingdoms. And in 1274, in 1275, King Edward the First, if you remember, he's the bad guy in the movie Braveheart. Although I think they
Long
portray
change.
him, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think they portray him very unfairly, actually. Um, what happens is he gives them a 15-year warning to clean up their act. Let's do some math. 1275 plus 15 years, 1290. They hadn't cleaned up their act by then, so they were expelled. Now, I do think this is unfair. I don't condone what happened, but and I think it's unfortunate that the whole community had to suffer because of what some people did. I mean, not everyone was responsible for economic exploitation. Only some of them were. But yeah, have you got any questions about that? If not, we can go on to the next one.
Okay, so I guess the objection here is that the expulsion of the Jews represents the persecution or something, or shows that they had hatred. Is that what the objector is trying to say there? Or?
I guess so.
Okay.
And it says that they were banned for 350 years. Question: Who allowed the Jews back into England? Let's see if you know this one.
Oh, didn't I think it's in the notes, isn't it? No, it's not. Uh, well, I know the Jews were there by the 1500s under King Henry VIII,
No, I
right?
don't think they were there under Henry. I think they came back under Cromwell.
Really? I seem to recall, well, maybe some of them had not been expelled because I'm just remembering a documentary I saw where it mentioned them in some kind of manuscript or something.
There might have been a very small community in London, but I think most of them were expelled in 1290.
Okay.
Okay, all right. In France, he talks about expulsion efforts of Philip II, Philip IV, Charles VI. Well, if you're going to pick on two Christian monarchs, two of those people were excommunicated. Philip II and Philip IV were both excommunicated. Not necessarily for how they treated Jews, but keep in King Philip II, I believe he was married. He wanted to divorce his wife, the Queen of Denmark, so he got excommunicated. Point is, he's not a good Christian, and his degree was actually reversed, so he did reverse it. I can't remember the year that happened. I've got a primary source on his life. I got that for my Third Crusade research because keep in mind, Philip II was also on the Third Crusade. Now, he talks about King Philip IV. King Philip IV was one of the most evil men in that time. King Philip IV expelled, not only did he expel the Jews, he expelled the Jews because he owed them a bunch of cash. There was a bunch of Italian bankers he expelled, same reason. He was in debt to the Templars, so he has them arrested and calls them heretics. At one point, he even kidnaps the Pope and, according to one source, has him tortured. The Pope! And at one point, now the Pope escapes eventually. And then, you have all the Templar tribe. But the point is, this is not an upstanding Catholic. An upstanding Catholic. It's not a guy who's known for his faith. Now, his third example, Charles the Sixth. Charles the Sixth was true, he was a Catholic king and he was not excommunicated. But the thing about Charles the Sixth is that he was a crazy guy. Like he was kind of like, okay, if you're going to give examples of Islamic extremism, you would point to religious fanatics, like Osama bin Laden or someone else. But would you point to Saddam Hussein? No, he was a Muslim. He did a ton of evil stuff, but it's not because he was a Muslim that he did evil stuff. He was a wacko, crazy nationalist. And Charles the Sixth, I would say the same thing. He was kind of like a Saddam Hussein of his time. Yes, he was Catholic, and unlike those other two, he was an excommunicated for part of his life. But but yeah, no, it's hard to blame on it's hard to blame on him because he was just a whack job. Yes, he was Catholic, true. All right, let's go to the next one.
Okay, but before we do, I do have sort of a generalized question
Sure.
about so with all of these instances, I get you're providing the Sitzum Leben, right? The life situation and the
Yeah, in the
circumstances
context.
as to, why, right? So in the case of Britain, we have that general rule against usury, and that's why they expelled them. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism per se. It's just those were the circumstances. They charged usury, Christians couldn't. And then in the France, we had the evil king who I realized I told you last time you were on the show I didn't know about him, but I do know a little bit about him actually. He comes up in Shroud Studies because he persecuted the Templars and also I think there is a TV show and stuff, so I do know a bit
Yeah,
about.
yeah. You're talking about King Philip the Fourth, right?
Yeah, yeah, Philip. The wasn't he? Didn't he have the nickname Philip the Fair? Or
Yes, King Philip the Fair. That was his nickname.
okay, so granted that there do seem to be all these individual circumstances and stuff, but maybe a Jewish objector would say, yeah, but what, okay, it seems to be the natural default that, hey, the Jew is the second class citizen. They're this scapegoat. So if anything goes wrong, we automatically go to expelling them or doing something to them and stuff like that. And they might say that automatic default of if something goes wrong, we do something to them. That in itself is anti-Semitic. Like what would you say is something about that? Like, why are they always the scapegoat to deal with a bad situation? Or
Well, I could say, why are the Arabs the scapegoat in Israel all the time? And I'm going to bring up Israel as we go because I'm going to compare expulsion versus expulsion, but we're not there yet. But yeah, I mean, yeah, there were some people, but a constant thing is that the Pope is telling them not to do it. Again, apart from Pope Paul IV, who put the Jews in the Roman ghetto, I don't know of any direct. I mean, I think the Jews were ordered to wear distinct clothing, but I think there's a commandment in the Torah, Book of Deuteronomy, that commands them to wear distinct clothing from the nations. So like I don't know. Again, and it's clothing. Like is that persecution? You have to wear clothing. Clothing didn't kill anyone, right? Um, yeah, and Jews, yeah, and again, Jews tend to live in their own communities. So I mean,
so
yeah.
yeah, that is actually a good point. That question, like what qualifies as persecution? Because it does seem that Jews have sort of like a wide net. Like it's not just about killing. If you restrict my ability to get a job or this kind of thing. So like just to clarify, when you are talking judging persecution, you have this strict stand. Like, is there killings, like mass killings and stuff, or
Well,
that
okay, there's a lot of Jews who think a lot of things are anti-Semitic, but I mean, a Jew who lives in 2025, he lives a pretty good life, right? N No matter where he lives, whether he lives in Israel, America, Canada, Europe, he lives a good life. And like, compare that to a Jew who lived in the shtetl in the 19th century. That's one of the objections we're going to get to. Um, they had pogroms, their houses were burnt down, and eventually it culminates being shipped to camps and being killed, right? I mean, now, like, what's anti-Semitism now? It's like, oh no, he called Israel an apartheid state. Okay, that might not be great, but compared to what your ancestors had to go through 150 years back, it's not that bad, right? What is persecution? That's the thing.
understood.
So
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for answering that because I think that is a good question, and it may be the reason why some Jewish people would see things differently. So like that needs to be worked out. Like, what do we mean by persecution? So thanks for answering that, and yeah, I'll let you move on to the next point.
okay, all right. All right. What's next on his list here? Okay, the expulsions of Spain and Portugal in 1497. Spain 1492, Portugal 1497. Okay. All right. First, I want to talk about the Spanish Inquisition because you need to talk about that, which happened a bit prior to that. The Spanish Inquisition was like a court that happened from about 1480 to about 1820 or so. Um, Around then, I think 1830, it was finally abolished for the last time. Napoleon abolished it, but they tried to start it up again, but it just didn't have the same power it had prior. The Spanish loved the Inquisition, by the way. Um, and the Inquisition was okay. I'll tell you what the Inquisition was, because there were a lot of Jews. Now, again, in pre 1492, it was not illegal to be a Jew in Spain, a Jewish Jew who practiced Judaism. but because of events in 1391 and other things, there were Jews who converted to Christianity but kept a lot of Jewish customs. They're known as the conversos. Now, most of the stats say the conversos were actually true converts, but for some reason they kept dressing like Jews. They ate Jewish food. They they lived in Jewish quarters, but they were Christian. So most of the evidence says that most conversos, there's some exceptions, were genuine Christians, but they just acted like Jews out of habit. I don't know, right? I mean, if a Jew converts to Christianity, he doesn't lose his Yiddish accent immediately, right? Um, so what happens is, uh, starting in 1391, this movement, and they're starting to get a lot of conversos. And at this point, you got three or four generations of conversos. So there are Jews who have not practiced Judaism in like three generations, three, four generations. But so you have the conversos, and then a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, these converso Jews have baptized, they've accepted baptism willingly. There were some forced baptisms in 1391, but that's a long time ago, right? There's no forced baptism in 1450 or anything. And so a lot of a ton of the Jewish community has become converso, and they're not fully trusted by the Christians, not fully trusted by the Jews. And so, since the Christians didn't trust them, they set up the Inquisition. Queen Isabella wrote to Pope Sixtus the Fourth, 1478. He's like, "Hey, you think we could set up tribunals?" And Pope's like, "Sure." And so in 1480, they set up the tribunal. It starts in Seville, and basically the Inquisition. If you're Baptist, so if you're a Jew, like a Jew, not a converso, you can say something bad about Jesus Christ, and it's not going to affect you because you're not baptized. You're not bound by that. But if you're uh, if you've accepted baptism, and you say something bad about Jesus Christ, or do something along the lines of Judaism, that's wrong. Uh, and so you're punished by that according to the secular law. So these courts were actually secular courts. They were run by the Dominicans because there are things that people say that sound like heresy to a normal person, but to a trained person, like they'll probe a bit forward. It's like, oh no, this guy's right. They were um, uh, 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 it sounds it sounds heresy, but I asked him a couple more questions, and no, he's actually Orthodox. By Orthodox, I mean small o Orthodox Christian, not Orthodox Jew. That might get confusing. So they have these tribunals. It starts in Seville and spreads to the rest of Castile. In a few years later, they were expanding to the Kingdom of Aragon. Um, I can't remember what city. I think it's Saragossa. There was an inquisitor named Pedro of Arbues or something like that. Okay. All right, here we go. Pedro de Arbues. I just looked him up on Wikipedia. All right. Okay, he died in Saragossa. The people of Spain, or the people of Aragon, didn't know what to do with the Inquisition. So an inquisitor comes to town because the whole Inquisition was kind of always a Castilian thing. Like they really liked it. The people in Aragon were kind of more on the fence. So it goes to Aragon. The first inquisitor goes to Saragossa. He comes to town. I'm the inquisitor. The Christians don't know what to do. The Jews don't know what to do. The conversos don't know what to do. So a couple nights after he arrives, he's praying in the cathedral alone, and he gets killed by a band of Jews and conversos. Becomes a martyr. And then there's this huge wave of anti-Jewish hatred. Then the Inquisition spreads throughout the Kingdom of Aragon. Now, the Inquisition could only lay a finger on you if you were a converso. Our friend Am Yisrael High, presuming he's not been baptized, if he lived in 1488 in Castile or Aragon, Inquisition couldn't lay a finger on him. If he said bad things about Christ publicly, they couldn't do anything because he was not baptized. If a converso did it, they could because converso's been baptized. So, wait, where are we? Okay, now in 1492. Keep in mind, the Pope at the time also tried to reform the Inquisition because there were some abuses, and King Fernando just told him to screw off, mind your own business. Like in the 1480s, a lot had happened. The Pope didn't have the power he had in the 1200s. Like in the 1200s, recall how he said the Pope could tell kings to change their code of law. He couldn't do that in the 1480s. Like the situation in Europe was very different. The kings were in charge, not the church. Church is still there, obviously, but the kings are in charge. So yeah, so King Fernando tells him to Pope to like, yeah, mind your own business, Pope. And the Pope couldn't do anything about it. He tried to reform the Inquisition by getting the local bishops involved. For read Henry Came and Edward Peters on this. Also read the letters of Joseph de Maistre. Don't read Netanyahu. That guy's a fraud. He I mean, he lies about his name. His name was Milakovsky, and he changed it to Netanyahu. What kind of a yeah. So okay, now and the Spanish Inquisition over 300 years killed 3,000 to 5,000 uh, uh, 3 to 5,000 heretics. Um, okay. Now in 1492, the king and queen, Fernando and Isabella, decide to expel the remaining Jews, not conversos, J Jewish Jews from their kingdom.
Oh, okay. So,
Eh,
so I do have three questions about the
Oh
Inquisitions.
yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah. So, you don't mind me interjecting with the questions,
No,
right?
have at it, have at it. I'm happy to help.
All right, cool. So, okay, so the first thing you mentioned that the people of Spain, at least some people in certain cities, loved it, these Inquisitions and stuff. And so I just wanted to clarify from you the worldview of these people. The purpose of these Inquisitions was about purifying the community, right? From people who are not being, if you say you serve Christ, you've got to be fully committed to Christ. You can't be in
Well,
between. So like they had this like community view, and their purpose is to purify by getting rid of these heretics.
well, in Europe at that time, and this is true all over Europe, um, blasphemy and heresy are in the law code in secular law. Like if you lived in Spain in 1500 and you stole something from the market, you wouldn't be tried by the Inquisition. You'd be tried by a normal secular court. Um, the whole idea with the Inquisition was to root out heresy because heresy was illegal according to secular law, and you could only be a heretic if you were baptized. A normal Jew is not baptized. A converso is. So they're bound to live up to their baptismal vow. And and so since heresy is punishable by death, the reason that they have the Inquisition is actually to save lives because a lot of people could say something that might sound heretical. It sounds like you're denying the Trinity, um, but you're put in front of an inquisitional court, and they'll be like, oh no, I see what you're doing. Yeah, that sounds heretical to a layman, but I'm the Inquisitor Dominican, and I can see what's going on. I can see he's not a heretic. Thank you. So in some ways, it was actually a life-saving institution. Ironically, a lot of people don't like when I say that, but that's the thing. All
Oh,
right, next.
okay. So yeah, and you're kind of answering the third point because I was going to say like I myself was when I was a young Christian or something, I was a modalist and didn't know it. Like I would
Yeah.
appeal to certain analogies that are actually heretical. But okay, so the second question that I had was speaking to the motivation, is anti-Semitism in some way the motivation? I would say no. I mean, what about the Protestants? We were subject to inquisitions too. So I think what's your take
Yeah.
on that? Clearly, you say the motivation isn't to do with anti-Semitism. It's more religious purity and stuff, as
Yeah,
they.
you could argue what Fernando and Isabella did was motivated by anti-Semitism. I'm going to get to that. But yeah, no, the whole idea, if you said anything controversial in Spain, like when you noticed the the history of Protestantism, um, like for example, France is a Catholic country, but for a while there were a good chunk of Protestants in France. I think John Calvin's from France, right?
Yeah,
There were a good chunk of not a majority, but a significant minority, 10 to 20% of the population was Protestant at one time. It's not anymore because kings, certain kings revoked their rights a bit later on in the 17th century. But Spain was rarely ever Protestant. There were very few Spanish Protestants. I think Servetus and the Protestants don't even like claiming him because he was a Unitarian heretic who believed in credo baptism as well. John Calvin had him burnt. But there were very few Spanish Protestants, very few, if any. And one of the reasons was because of the Inquisition. Like they try sending people into France and they start saying stuff that's not according to the Catholic faith. Boom, you're in an Inquisition tribunal and you're going to say what you feel. And okay, it's a heretic. Boom, you're not getting anywhere, right? So that's why Spain always stayed Catholic. Spain always stayed 100% Catholic. There were no Protestant like like the same thing that happened in France didn't happen in Spain because of the Inquisition.
fair enough. So I think you've been kind of answering my next question was sort of an ethical one. Like what's your take on the morality of these inquisitions? Because a lot of people would say they were moral, but you're saying that it served a good purpose in your view.
Well, keep in mind everywhere was doing that at the time. The Protestants had inquisitions against the Catholics, and now that doesn't say it's right. And I think you're a Baptist, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you'd be burned at the stake by a Catholic or Protestant Inquisition.
Pretty,
Yeah.
well,
Again, I'm not
I'd be
saying.
burned at the stake by the Catholics or drowned by apparently the Protestants like drowning as their.
Well, I think it depends where you were. If you were in England, they'd have burnt you at the stake. If you're in Switzerland, they'd have probably drowned you. But it's like I know that's an ugly thing, right? But I think the reason why I think it would be immoral to have an inquisition today is because, like a Catholic country, like say Spain is still fairly Catholic, though it's largely secularized, but France as well. But I mean, I don't think it would be a moral thing to have inquisitions because they don't have proper catechism anymore. Like back in 1400, you lived and breathed the faith. It was everywhere in the culture. All the books that you read, to the extent that people could read, all the iconography you saw, like stained glass window in the churches, it all had to do with that. People would go to church all the time. That's why they have the lectionary in churches. I know Baptists don't have a lectionary, right? But yeah, no, and like when people say like, oh yeah, people before the Reformation didn't know their faith at all, that's not really true. Now they most likely hadn't read the Bible themselves. One, because until the printing press, Bibles were hard to get, and they were and that's why you'd have it read in church. That's why there was a lectionary. They can read from the Bible, and the homily would explain it. Now, at sometimes the preaching was fairly low, but certainly in the 1400s, you have the power preachers, Saint Bernardine of Siena, Geronimo Savonarola, and a few others as well. But it weren't the people weren't as ignorant as you think. That they'd probably know the creed, they probably know the Our Father, probably the Hail Mary. They know something about a saint, a local saint who they'd have a devotion to. But no, like the idea that people didn't know anything was no, they probably didn't know what we know because we read and study the scriptures. We have 500 years of printing press on our side, uh, and stuff like that. So, but no, so I think it would be immoral in a fully Catholic country to do something like the Inquisition today because of the lack of education.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That it's an interesting answer, kind of, and it's counter what people would expect because people just make that assumption. Well, we are far more knowledgeable than them back then or something. So people would think we are more responsible. But you're saying, well, no, back then they were what's the word? Inculcated or something, within that culture. So actually, they were in a position to know better than us today, and that's why it was appropriate back then versus now. So yeah, thank you for your answer on that. And yeah, I think I'll let you move on to the 1492. I think is where you were going.
Okay, yeah, 1492. This has nothing to do with the Inquisition, but King Ferdinand and Isabella expelled. Now they gave a 90-day warning that they were allowed to. They had chance to sell their property. Obviously, they'd be a motivated seller because um, they're gone unless they convert. If they converted, they could stay. And usually on the end, usually it's anywhere between 40 to 200,000 in Spain. So like say 40 to 200. Let's go the high end. Let's go 200,000. Portugal in 1497, you can add another 50,000. So 250 were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula in the 1490s. Now, I personally don't condone this. I don't think you would either. I don't think there were a lot left, and a lot of Jews were becoming conversos. It was a great avenue of conversion. Um, but okay, I would say this. I don't think it was good what happened. However, if our friend Yisrael High wants to be consistent, he should condemn the early Zionists who expelled 750,000 Arabs, three times as many as Jews were expelled from Iberia. If not more, I'm going with the high estimate, but there were 7 to 800,000 Jews expelled, or sorry, 7 to 800,000 Arabs expelled by the Zionists. Half of them were expelled prior to the war because they declared independence May 14th, 1948. The next day, a whole bunch of Arab countries declare war against them. Pretty much the only countries that had any force were Jordan, who ended up taking over the West Bank, and Egypt. Like they're like, oh, five countries declared war, but like I think only two of them had troops on the ground, maybe a third one. But the point is they expelled far more people. Like, okay, if I'm a Jew, I'm not going to like Fernand and Isabella because they expelled a bunch of my people. But I think if you're Israel High, if he's a Zionist, if he's an anti-Zionist, okay, that's one thing. But if he's a Zionist, the country he supports expelled over three times as many people from the the state of Israel, the land of Israel, than uh, than the Spanish and Portuguese expelled. So I think there's a bit of a tu quoque there. Now, if he does condemn them, because I assume he's going to comment on this video, I hope he condemns it. If he doesn't, that's just double standards on his part. As a Catholic, I condemn what those monarchs did. They're my fellow Catholics, but they did something evil. They should have let the Jews stay. And I think the Jews the conversos were a great avenue for conversion of Jews would have continued to happen. So again, I'm against it for that and other reasons. But still, I think it's wrong to expel people. And a lot of the expelled Jews, believe it or not, went to Rome and joined the community there, which would unfortunately get placed in the Roman ghetto in the 1550s. Although, according to the Papal Bull, they were causing trouble in the cities, but that's something else. I won't get into that one because uh, our friend didn't bring that one up, so he didn't come prepared for that. But so it's to Quoque. Does he condemn Israel for doing the exact same thing, only three or four times worse? Okay, and the first time that they get control of a land is they expel 700,000 to 800,000 people. Okay, so that's far worse than Fernando and Isabella ever did. And Fernando and Isabella gave him a 90-day warning. They had a chance to sell their stuff and all that stuff. And keep in mind, half of the Arabs fled before the war started because the war started on the 15th of May. The most famous episode in that war, in the Israeli War of Independence, was the massacre at Deir Yassin. That happened in April of 1948, before the Arabs had declared war. Same with Tel Aviv, also called Jaffa. They had been emptied of all their Arabs, or about 90% of their Arabs, in April. Same with Haifa. They'd been depopulated with all their Arabs. So I mean, again, this doesn't get Ferdinand and Isabella off the hook, but I just hope our friend is consistent to say that 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 presumably a country that he supports has done far worse. And today, those Arab refugees or their descendants have not been allowed back. All right. Have you got any questions about that, or do you want to move
Oh,
on?
just a random comment because I didn't know that when the Spanish expulsion of the Jews happened that they gave them sufficient time to sell their property or stuff like that. Like that does seem like an act of kind of graciousness or mercy, despite the fact that overall, yes, they're doing a wrong thing, an evil, sinful thing, but they they did give that little bit of grace there, which would maybe speak against, yeah, they're just
Yeah,
driven by
compared
pure
to the
hate.
Arabs, the Arabs got no such grace in 47 and 48. You got the Haganah or the Irgun come to their door with a gun and say, "Get out! It's our house now." They would give the houses. If you read the book "The General's Son" by Miko Peled, he's an Israeli Jew who's anti-Zionist. His dad served as a general in the 48 and I believe the 67 war, and I think in a couple wars in between that. They talk about how like they'd go in, the food on the table would still be warm because the Arabs had fled so quickly. The soup on the table would be warm, and they would just and they're like, all right, who wants this house? Because they just chased out the Arabs. Um, yeah, so I mean, yeah, if you're going to condemn the Spanish monarchs, you got to condemn the state of Israel three or four times harder, if not more. Remember, we're going with the high estimate here. It could easily have been 40,000 or 80,000. I think it's around 100,000, but I don't know. Like the numbers are thrown around, right? Some say 40 to 80, some say 1 to 2, but the point is the Israelis did far worse. So y- Yam Yisrael High, do you condemn with three or four times ferocity what the Haganah, the Irgun, and the Stern Gang did to the Arabs in the 1940s? And if he wants to say they left on their own, that's absolutely ridiculous. Because, like I said, half of them had been and by the way, the Israeli historians, since 1978, all this stuff is declassified because 30 years, 40 declassified. If you go read Peter Beinart's book, being Jewish after the destruction of Gaza. He gives the receipts in that. And if you go, you can look at the Haganah reports. At least 70% of them fled. I think only 5% of them willingly left. So he can't play that card either. But all right, where are we next? Where are we next? Let me let,
1497, did you already cover
yeah, like I kind of merged those together. Okay, in
19?
Russia in the 19th century, violent pogroms did destroy communities. And okay, again, now this is the 19th century. This isn't the time of the church. And if you read these pogroms are more to do with nationalist. Keep in mind the 19th century was the era of nationalism because it was blood. You know, Charles Darwin was popular here. It was all about the superior race. So the Jews are persecuted not because they didn't believe in Jesus, but because they um, they were uh, they were not Russians, right? Or not Hungarians, or not whatever. So I mean, it's a very different situation. And if you read Theodor Herzl's book, The Jewish State, the Judenstaat, he admits in this the persecution that he's writing in, I think, around 1900. He's like, what the Jews are persecuting is not the religious persecution of old. Now, of course, I don't condemn what's going on. I don't think you do either. Of what's going on in the shtetl uh, at this time. But no, but the thing is, this was because of nationalism, and nationalism was king, right? In the 1900s. In fact, the early Zionists, most of them weren't religious either. They were very nationalistic Jews, just like the Russians that did the pogroms were very nationalistic. But yeah, so according to Theodore Herzl, in fact, I might even find the quote. Herzl, the Jewish State PDF. You want to say something while I look for the quote?
Yeah, I was just trying to think of something relevant because again, it's kind of in the same vein. I agree with you totally that nationalism was like it's uncontroversial that that was on the rise in the 19th century. This was the cultural milieu in Europe and stuff like that, and obviously Zionism started back then, right? So that whole movement or understanding of getting back to the land as a nation.
And the ironic thing is back then, a lot of religious Jews were saying, no, it goes against the Torah to have a Jewish state based on blood, even if it is in our ancestral land. And a lot of religious Jews were against Zionism. Now it's they've completely done a 180. It's part of the God's plan now, right? But I found the quote from Herzl. We shall not again. He's talking about causes of anti-Semitism in his book, The Jewish State. We shall not again touch on those causes which are a result of temperament, prejudice, and limited views, but shall here restrict ourselves to political and economic causes alone. Modern anti Semitism is not to be confounded with the religious persecution of the Jews of former times. It does occasionally take a somewhat religious bias, but the main current of the aggressive movement has now changed. In the principal countries where anti Semitism prevails, it does so as a result of the emancipation of the Jews. Okay, so in other words, you saw the quote there. It's not the religious persecution of old. So yeah, so it's nothing to do with religion. Keep in mind, this is the 19th century where secularism is at its peak, right?
And just so that quote, so this is his justification trying to persuade the religious Jews this is why we need a land, right?
Well, he's just trying to persuade Jews in general, not necessarily the religious or the secular ones, but all of them. And keep in mind, if you read the Jewish state, he has two candidates for the Jewish state: Palestine, which ended up happening, or Argentina. But Herzl and the early Zionists knew they could never get the religious Jews on board unless it was Palestine. So, like, if you're an early Zionist, you are uh, okay. Palestine is an option, but so is Argentina. I think some people said Uganda. There were a lot of candidates for the Jewish state, not just Palestine. Um, and so, but the point is, what Herzl is saying, it's not the religious persecution of old, And Herzl was like he's like the most famous Jew from that period. He's the one who, like, if you go to Israel, he's treated as, like you got Moses and you got Herzl, right? One gave us the Torah, one gave us this country that we're in, right? He's very important in Israel. I think there's a whole museum dedicated to him. I could be wrong about that, but no, he's an absolute hero to the Jewish people. Unless you're an anti-Zionist Jew, which those Jews are increasing in number, by the way. But the majority of Jews are uh, still Zionists. There's certain shades of Zionism, like two-state solution, 67 borders, all that stuff. So they're different, but most Jews identify as Zionist. Probably at least 80% of Jews in the world are Zionist to one degree or another. Um, and,
Were there, oh, sorry, but I was
yeah,
just,
and that's everywhere from the followers of Kahana to the two-state solutions on the 67 borders people. About 80% of Jews still believe in Zionism to that extent. All right. What's the next question?
so I was just wondering because obviously you read the quote from Herschel there and stuff, and
Herzl, yeah.
someone might say yeah, he's got that agenda, so that's of course he's trying to make it sound like, oh, we're facing off against something we've never seen before, so we have to make a radical step. I'm just curious, what did surrounding people around the same time, did they also remark that something's different, like that we're going through something we haven't had to deal with?
Well, because keep in mind the 19th century was the uh the time of race, where race and blood is king, right? What was and I'll prove that to you. What was the name of Charles Darwin's book?
On the origin of species, and then it has like a long title or
Yeah,
something.
it does. The vast majority of people just think it's on the origin of species. That's actually a shortened title. The true title is on the origin of species by means of natural selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Favored races. So that's how it was back in the 19th century. Race was king. Religion took a back seat at that time. Keep in mind, at the time of Ferdinand and Isabella, keep in mind, this is on the eve of the Protestant Reformation. The church had no power left. The King Fernando told the Pope to go screw himself. And King Fernando, he died a Catholic. The same thing happened with King Henry VIII, but it's harder to use him as an example because he split with the church, right? Like when I think it was 1538 when Pope Paul III wrote excommunicating the king and said the people of England don't have to pay attention to him anymore. Like no one cared. No one cared because the Pope didn't have the power anymore he had in the 11th or 12th century. Like keep in mind when the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV uh was excommunicated, the most powerful politician in Europe was excommunicated by Pope Gregory VII. What did he have to do to get back in? You know this, Dale?
So King Henry the Fourth?
what technically Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV. How did he get back in the church?
Um, I'm trying to remember, like,
That's fine. I'll tell the story. What happened was in Germany, once he was excommunicated, no one would listen to him. Not like the peasant down the street didn't recognize him as an authority. So he had to go all the way down to Canossa, outside of the Pope's castle, dress up as a homeless person, and beg for 3 days and 3 nights to get back into the church, because no one in his kingdom would listen to him if he was excommunicated. In the 14 and 1500s, that didn't happen anymore. Like you have King Ferdinand telling the Pope to go screw himself. You have King Henry VIII completely ignoring the Pope. Europe was a different place. And by the time you get to the 19th century, religion is way more irrelevant and race is king, right? So, I mean, to blame what happened in the 19th century of Russia on religion when even Herzl agrees that it's not religion, it's not the religious persecution of old. It's completely new. And you saw the title of Darwin's book, Favored Races, right? Because race was king back then.
yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like from my studies into the creation evolution debate and stuff like that. So yeah, I was aware of that, the longer title and its controversy and stuff like that, and race. Look, even into the early 20th century. I mean, this played a huge role and stuff like that. Charles Darwin's work as well as things. So I think Nietzsche was big in Germany as well, right? With raising Adolf Hitler and stuff like that. And it led to things about like eugenics and stuff like that. So yeah, I agree with you that race was a predominant issue and stuff like that. It wasn't really about the religion during that
Yeah, and it would
time.
stay that way until the 1940s, really. With it only died after Nazism. Like Nazism kind of discredited racial outlooks. Because it's like you care, because like the whole line was, oh, you want to care all about race? That's how it ends up, right? And so then people started to abandon nationalism after the war. So,
Okay, I can think of a question because so I'm not sure race was a huge component. As I said, I agree with you on that. Um, but there's also this element around the late 1800s, it started coming in that this notion about the Jews, this conspiracy theory type thing, like, oh, the Jews control everything, right? And you can see some of that propaganda going on in World War One and stuff like that, right? Like the Jews have control of the entire world, like the top institutions, banking
oh,
stuff.
like the protocols of the elders of Zion and stuff like that.
Yeah, like I do think that also played a role in this anti-Semitism type stuff as well that arose in the 19th and early 20th centuries.
Well, that's a. I don't know how much influence that document had at the time. Um, I didn't prepare anything on it because our friend didn't go into that, but like our friend being Israel High. Um, but like yeah, that was a document. It had some slanders against Jews in it, obviously. Um, but keep in mind, what does it come out of? Does it come out of an area where religion is king or where race is king? No, it comes out of an era where race is king. And we know that the persecution against Jews was largely done by race. Because, like, for example, if you go to the late 1900s in the shtetl in Russia, a lot of Jews are starting to fall in love with communism. You know, Karl Marx has written, you know, this is before Vladimir Lenin, but the communist idea is around. A lot of Jews fell in love with it. Now, the Jews who believed in communism were not the religious Jews, not the ones with the black coat. They were the secular Jews, the ones. And if you go anywhere today, the secular, like if you go to Israel, the secular Jews, they don't have the kippah, they don't have the black coats, they're just dressed like a normal person. If you come across a Jew who's got the kippah, who's got the black coat, then they're a religious Jew, right? So like what would happen is it came out that communism is a Jewish thing because a lot of Jews were believing in communism. Not every communist was a Jew, but very disproportionately Jews were communist. And so they'd be like, communism is Jewish. So the people would attack, like the Russian people would attack the Jews, the people that looked Jewish, not the secular Jews who actually believed in communism. They would go attack the ones with the black coats and the black hats, the ones who hated communism as much as they did, ironically. So, but it's because it's a Jewish thing. Again, it's race, right? So,
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so yeah, so racism was the primary driver, and that gave rise to
yeah, again,
that's
it's not. Well, again, and his final thing is the Holocaust, Germany in the 1940s.
yeah.
Now, uh, again, we could do some tu quoque here, and I always say if Christianity is to blame for the Holocaust, the Jews are to blame for all the terribles of communism, right? We could do that, but I want to say that okay, we have a large movement against Jews in Germany. In Germany, okay, because the Third Reich started in Germany. Yes, it expanded, but it started in Germany. And if you're gonna um, compare this to, okay, I got a question for you. Was Germany more religious in the the 11th century or the 20th century?
I mean, I think the obvious thing is the 11th century. I mean,
And remember, when some people in Germany tried to attack Jews in the 11th century, the bishops did everything they could to stop them. The 20th century, when no one cares about religion or very few people, um, they're able to get away with that. So Catholic Europe was a lot safer for Jews. I'm not saying it was perfect, but I'm saying it was better than what you had in nationalism. And I want to recommend. I know Pope Pius XII is often smeared as Hitler's pope. That's so stupid. But I would recommend a documentary on Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire, done by Michael Knowles, which which tells how the Pope was regarded as Hitler's greatest enemy. When Hitler wrote to Franco, he said Pope Pius XII was his number one enemy. So and the Pope did a lot to save Jews. He wasn't perfect. I'm not saying he was perfect, but he was regarded as Hitler's number one enemy. So, and when the chief rabbi of Rome converted after the war, he took the name Eugenio Pacelli was Pius XII's his baptismal name. His papal name was Pius XII, but his baptismal name was Eugenio Pacelli, and the rabbi was baptized as Eugenio Zoli. His last name was Zoli, but he took the name Eugenio in honor of the man who did as much as he could to save Jews. A lot more could be said about that, but yeah, we've been going for about an hour and a half. So if you got any final questions, I'll take them.
okay, so yeah, so two final questions then. So one on the Hitler thing. I just wanted to kind of probe. I know there's this thing called Hitler's table talk, where apparently he reveals he has no regard for Christianity. It's a wimp's religion, and he talks about how he loves the Shinto and the Muslim faith because it's a lot more militant or something.
Yeah.
Is there any truth to that from your knowledge
Well,
of history or?
there are there are two editions of Table Talk. One is true, one is fake. I believe the Christianity quote is in the true one. Um, I've never read the Table Talk myself, but based uh, on what I've learned about it, it's actually from the mouth of Hitler himself, and there's some fascinating things in there. Not just what he said about Christianity, but other things as well. Because it was stuff about I can't remember who was involved, but a guy would be typing up what Hitler said during his conversations at supper, and then Hitler would sign it, just to put it into record. But no, yeah, that's true. And there's no evidence that Hitler, yes, he was baptized, but there was no evidence that in the 30s or 40s he practiced Christianity in any way. In fact, the day before he commits suicide, he got got married to Eva Brown, right? But he didn't have a church wedding. He had a secular wedding, right? Back then, if you cared about religion, you would get a church wedding. You could do a secular wedding, but if you cared about faith, you would. There's no evidence that now the top Nazis. If you take a look at the top Nazis, Himmler, uh, Joseph Goebbels, and Hitler, and a few others, Hermann Goering, they were all Catholic by birth. But I don't see any evidence that they practice it in any meaningful way. I mean, if you ask my dad what religion he is, he would say he's a Lutheran, but he hasn't been to the church in 40, 50 years, right? He just kind of vaguely identifies as one. This, I don't know. So
Yeah, oh, sorry.
again,
Yeah,
again, if the church wanted to kill off the entire Jewish population in Europe, it could have done it in the 11th, 12th, or 13th century when the church commanded insane amount of power. In 1188 or 1187, the Pope gets word that Jerusalem has fallen to the Muslims. He calls the Third Crusade. He tells the King of France and the King of England to stop their war against each other and go on crusade to the Holy Land on their own expense. That kind of power is unprecedented in human history. So, if the Pope wanted, he could have had every Jew killed in Europe in the around that time because he could command kings to do things. By the 19th century, he had no power. Like he didn't
yeah,
even have any power at the time of the Reformation,
yeah, yeah.
or prior to that. But like, yeah, I'm saying so. A question: If Christians, if the church, specifically the church, wanted to get rid of all the Jews in Europe, it could have done it in the 1100s or 1200s when the church had authority, when it exercised authority that no one in human history has exercised. Again, telling two kings to stop their war and to go across the world, because back then, like now you take a look at a map, you got Europe, you got Israel. But back then, before you had planes and you could fly there in 3 hours, that was a long way away. It's kind of like China, and it takes years to get there, and you need a ton of money. And now he tells them to stop their war, and he tells the Holy Roman Emperor, who's the other big monarch of Europe, and tells the King of Sicily, William of Sicily, that all of you guys need to go on crusade. Stop fighting each other. You guys got to go to another continent and crusade to get Jerusalem back. And they all did. So if they wanted to kill if the church wanted the Jews dead, why didn't they do it in that time when they could have killed them in the span of a couple weeks? Anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say about that.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I take definitely take your point. Cultural Christians kind of thing, or just Christians in name versus ones that actually mean it. It's hard. It's hard
Or
to
or
tell.
or, or I think secular people who were baptized as babies.
Yeah.
Like you're a Baptist, right? You believe in credo only baptism, right?
Right.
Um, and one of the criticisms is, well, that baby has no faith. He hasn't chosen Christianity. He's just been in a Christian family. Now, he might make do on that baptism later in life. He might not. but we don't know if he's going to be a devout believer. And I think that's that's an okay criticism, right? And so the question is, like, again, are we going to blame uh communism on the Jews? Like Trotsky was a Jew. Are we going to say he was bad because of Judaism? No. He was, yeah, he was probably circumcised. He probably observed a tiny bit of Judaism growing up. But Trotsky's Zinoviev, Kamenev, not to mention the Hungarian communists, Rakashi, Farkas, and Gero, were all Jews. And again, are we going to blame Judaism? No, because Judaism in its pristine form condemns communism. Just a lot of Jews were attracted to communism. Um, so are you going to blame Judaism because of communism? I wouldn't, just like I don't blame Nazism and their horrible deeds on Christianity
Fair enough.
because they were baptized as kids, right? Um,
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, cool. So my last question, I'm going to take you all the way back to the beginning,
okay.
back to Jesus' time, because this was something also our friend Alim, or however you pronounce the name, um, they mentioned that, look, first of all, they're a Jesus mythicist, but I don't need you to respond directly to that. But they
Uh,
this objection that the term rabbi is on Jesus' lips in the Gospels, and that's totally anachronistic because that term never existed until the second century AD. So,
well, I think that's only true if you look at rabbinic literature. It doesn't appear in their literature until after Yohanan ben Zakkai or whoever. It's because of much later it happens to come in. Doesn't mean that no one used the term in the first century. You think someone just invented it and no one in the first century said that? Like I know the rabbi is a more prominent role in rabbinic Judaism than in the time of the temple, because back then the religion was based around sacrifices, and now it's based off of Torah teaching. So the rabbi is more prominent now, or after 70 AD. But the idea that it wasn't there before, um, I, I mean, if a Jew says, "Oh, I'm inventing a term. Let's start calling each other rabbi." That doesn't necessarily mean it's before because he could have got it from someone else. So I mean, again, we don't have a ton of documents back then, but usually it's just my document versus your document at this time. And I mean, okay, say the whole rabbi is fake. Say Jesus was never called rabbi and the Gospels invented that. Like when the Gospel of Mark or Matthew was doing his Gospel, it's like, the Jews call their teachers rabbi now in this post-temple period. Maybe we should shoehorn that back into Jesus's mouth, uh, or to the mouths of his followers who talk to him. That doesn't mean Jesus didn't exist because this guy believes Jesus didn't exist. I mean, if that's the best evidence you have, like, okay, perhaps there are some scholars of higher criticism who do believe that Jesus wasn't called rabbi, but they still believe he existed. Like Bart Ehrman thinks Jesus existed. Um, yeah, so yeah, that's what I want to say on that. But I do believe he was called rabbi. So yeah.
awesome. All right, cool. I think we've covered it in terms of Am Yisrael Chai's objections, and we've gone through the full history in chronological order and addressed every single uh, instance that they think proves that there is this anti-Semitism among Christianity and stuff like that. So yeah, I hope you're happy on your end. You feel you've been thorough and covered every possible angle.
Yeah, no, I've been I just wanted to share what I know. I'm glad I got to share that. For those who want to do some further reading, you can get this book. It has the Jewish accounts. This is The First Crusade. It's edited by a guy named Edward Peters. I believe he's the same Edward Peters who wrote the book on the Spanish Inquisition. Chronicle of Saint Theophanes the Confessor, and Conquerors and Chronicles of Early Medieval Spain. It's got 4 or 5 chronicles in here. I just read from one of them, but they're really good because they talk about the Islamic invasion. So if you want to learn about that in 712, it's a great source for a lot of stuff. Same with Theophanes, actually. He's written on a whole bunch of things. Um, and yeah, yeah. If you want to do any future shows on church history from that era, I'd be happy to come on. I love church history. Um,
Absolutely. I,
and
I, I was just gonna. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I remembered last time we were mentioning the shroud, and I brought on my friend Jack Markward to talk about his view of the shroud's history from 1001 to 1207 AD. So I just curious, did you see that, and did you have any thought?
no, I haven't. I know the shroud gets brought up by John Scalitzis, an 11th century Byzantine, and he talks about how they got it from Edessa, which is in modern day Turkey, and it got brought to Constantinople, and then the Crusaders took it to Europe in 1204.
Fair enough. The reason I was asking if you saw that because Jack he denies that actually. He has an alternative history scene. So that's why I just was
Now,
wondering.
there are some people who say that what John Scalise has talked about is not the shroud. But I think if you read the description, it's pretty obvious it's the shroud. If you want, I can't go get it now, but if you want, I could bring that on sometime, or I could send the source to you in an email or something. What does your friend say it is?
So he thinks that the shroud is another cloth known as the image of God incarnate, or another alias, image of Cameliana. That's his hypothesis. He's known for kind of presenting an alternative view, but I'd love to have you back. You said for any show on church history, maybe you'd be good to have it in a dialogue, just because you know the secular history, to engage on that topic sometime too.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, cool. Well, that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much to Al for coming on. And I hope the fan is happy that, hey, we took your objection seriously and we dealt with it head on and addressed it with the facts. So, yeah,
With the sources too.
with the sources, the primary sources, which is the most important thing. So, yeah, with that said, have a great week, everybody. I will be seeing you. Actually, I've got another show on Friday with a PhD historian, actually, Dr. Cheryl White, who's been on the History Channel and that sort of thing. And she's got a new book coming out on once again, the history of the Shroud. So she's going to be promoting her book, and we'll be talking about that on Friday. But otherwise, have a great week and take care.
God bless.